Last I wrote, I was struggling to remove the teak bungs from the trim on the deck house since they had been permanently epoxied in and were giving me a bit of trouble. Thanks to some very helpful recommendations, I found the solution in a Forstner bit. It's basically a drill bit that has a small point at the very tip for locating where you want to drill, and bores a clean-cut hole with a square bottom, perfect for making sure I would be able to plug them again later. I started by using a small pick to make an indent in the center of each plug by eye. Then I put the point of the Forstner bit in the indent, drilled out the bung, being careful not to hit the screw head, and removed the bronze screw hiding behind it. I ended up ordering 2 of the Frierson bits I needed for the screws online, and they, obviously, work way better than the Phillips I had tried. I immediately put the screws into Ziploc bags that I had labeled with their location because I'm really good at losing screws. With that system in place, I was able to quickly get the bungs and screws removed and start pulling off the teak trim and other fittings on the deck house. I noticed a waxy yellow goop under the Companionway trim. At first I thought it was an adhesive, but I believe it's bedding compound, likely a brand called Dolphinite, which is used to help waterproof and seal joints. It was satisfying to scrape off, especially since the oils in the bedding compound kept the teak underneath its original deep orange color. Once I had the trim off, I could see that the back of the deck house was made of 1 1/4 solid teak. As I pulled the trim off, I also labeled it with the location and orientation. After the Companionway trim, I tried to remove the porthole that looks into the galley from the aft of the deck house. It took me a bit of prodding to figure out how they're put together. There's a bezel ring that screws onto the porthole from the outside, which secures everything in place. There's 2 holes for screws to keep the ring from rotating, but it doesn't look like they were ever installed. What's stopping it from rotating is some sort of adhesive, so I had to find a way to break that seal. I tried to use a thin scraper and heat along with some cedar shims to try to cut the adhesive, but that didn't work and I was worried about bending the bezel. I decided to spray the threads with penetrating fluid and leave it to soak in. The next day, I used a putty knife to try to cut the adhesive again, and then the bezel ring came right off.
Yes.
It looks like it wasn't actually adhesive keeping them stuck on, but more bedding compound that had hardened and gummed up.
That was dumb.
One of the reasons I'm removing the portholes is that the sides of the deckhouse are cracked and will need to be repaired. After that, I sprayed the rest of the portholes with penetrating fluid and left them for a few days. With the arrival of spring came the birth of a bunch of lambs on the farm. I think we have a dozen or so, but it's hard for me to keep track. They're adorable and are pretty funny to watch run around, but I can't linger in their paddock too long or the ram will get me. He's a bit of a jerk and loves to headbutt anyone that isn't paying attention, but we still love him. Luckily, these are Katahdin sheep, so the ram don't have horns.
Got something to say?
Oh, and the piglets are so much bigger already. The next day I got to work removing the fittings from the cabin top, starting with the Companionway hatch and its rails. Uh-oh. I couldn't get the wooden base of one of the rails to pop off, so I wrapped an old piece of wire around two handles to make a wire saw, which lasted for about 15 seconds and then broke, but it did work to break the wood away from the surface. I'll try again with some better wire. My friend has some old banjo strings that might work. After I removed a bunch of the bronze fittings, I tackled the teak grab rails that run the length of the deck house, which again had epoxied bungs. Luckily, the procedure with the Forstner bit worked just as well and the process went quickly. The grab rails seem incredibly fragile now that they aren't attached to anything. I'm kind of impressed with their construction, especially the long one, which is one continuous piece over 8 feet long. I'll have to be extremely careful not to break them because I really don't want to have to remake these things. Once everything was off the cabin top, I started to strip the canvas. It was really satisfying. It pulled off in big strips. but that was where the easy and satisfying work ended. With the canvas off, I could see the nightmare that was waiting for me underneath. A layer of plywood and hundreds of screw heads slathered in epoxy, all of which would need to be drilled or chiseled out.
Oh my god, there's like hundreds of them.
But I'll get to that later.
What do you think I should do?
Hey. I received a postcard from Dominique in Greece this week. She wrote about the old wooden boats that the fishermen there use called kaikia, and how they're rapidly disappearing. We had something similar happen here with our dories and other small wooden fishing boats. Luckily, we have some folks around Nova Scotia who are still building them and keeping the tradition alive. We've had a few days that were hovering around 25 degrees Celsius, so it felt like it was probably a good time to put away a few of the 7 wool blankets that kept me alive through the winter. It felt good to put them in my old cedar-lined steamer trunk, like a proper ceremonial welcome to the warmer weather. My friend Anita also mended my overalls. After 3 years of carpentry work, they were looking a bit tattered. She did an incredible job and gave my overalls a new life, and honestly, I like them way better now that a friend had a hand in repairing them. I much prefer these to a new pair.
Well, old friend, it's that time.
Back at the cabin top, I fired up the generator and broke out the belt sander to start attacking the epoxy and reveal the location of the screw heads. I was going to do the whole surface, but man, this epoxy is tough. I ended up just sanding across each line of screws to try to save time. I wasn't going to try to save the plywood anyways, just the tongue and groove and teak beams beneath. I took a break from sanding to take another shot at the portholes, but they still weren't ready to let go. I tried to make a big pin wrench out of a piece of wood and some brass bolts I had lying around, but it predictably failed since the pine was too soft. My friend is going to help me make a proper one out of steel flat stock, so hopefully that'll work to give me more leverage. After that, I got to chiseling the epoxy out of every single one of the screws holding down the plywood. I won't subject you to all the monotony, but I ended up using a rusty 1/4-inch chisel and my old shipwright's mallet to do the bulk work, and then used a pick to clean things up. Once the screws were exposed, I started backing them out with my grandfather's old brace bit to better control the torque, and then finished it off with my cordless drill. Once I had all the screws out of one of the sheets of plywood, I set my circular saw to the thickness of the ply and then cut along the edges to try to free it from its epoxy shackles. But it was not free because it's epoxied to the tongue and groove.
Epoxy! Ah!
Anyway, that's all the fight I have in me this week. I'll get back to it after some rest.
Alright, I'm selling the boat.
Writing you from a forest coming back to life, Joshua.